Yeah, I see where they're already picking Clemson and Florida State to be the football people this next year in the ACC.
Really?
Yeah.
I saw where they're going to, instead of, they're going to have 12 teams play a playoff instead of doing it like they're doing next year. Top 12 have a chance to be the number one.
They were just talking about that, you know, the ACC teams. They thought that said, you know, the last few years have been Clemson and Florida State have not been the dominant teams. And they thought they might return to dominance, but who knows? Somebody gets injured, someone. And someone can.
Good evening and welcome to the May 3rd, 2023 Board of Commissioners Special Meeting. I am Dr. Anthony Riddick, the 2023 Chair of the Board. Present tonight are Commissioner Linda Hoffler, Commissioner Brian Roundtree, Commissioner Emily Truman, County Manager Scott Sauer, County Attorney Mr. Pitt Godwin, Clerk to the Board Jolitha Chestnut. Commissioner Craddock, Vice Chair, is excused. The prayer and pledge of allegiance will be led by Commissioner Brian Roundtree.
Dear God, thank you for allowing us to conduct the business of governing this afternoon. Lord, we ask you to give us direction, to give us insight. We acknowledge you in everything that we do. Help us to agree to disagree. Help us to be progressive. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will now have a financial overview of Gates County's debt service obligation by Davenport Associates, Mr. Ted Cole, and our county manager will now introduce Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Davenport Financial Group has been advising this governing body for probably a decade or more on a number of major financing projects related to schools, social services, things of that nature. I've had the pleasure of working in several counties where his team has also been at the forefront of the financial planning, and I think as we begin to kick off our budget process, this report will help us establish a good solid foundation as to where the county stands in terms of its long-term debt obligations and its cash position. Welcome, Ted.
Okay, well, thank you. Good evening. I'm Ted Cole with Davenport. All of you have a hard copy. There are page numbers in the bottom right corner. I would be happy to entertain questions as we go. As Scott said, this is informational, not looking for any action for you all, just hopefully some good information. Financially, primarily what we're talking about and most of our work with local governments is on the capital side, so capital projects, planning for those projects, how are you going to finance them or pay for them, what are the impacts on your budgets. And so we're going to cover a lot of debt and capital topics, but we will cover a little bit on operations and fund balance, and we'll also talk about some comparisons to other local governments, counties mostly, so you have an idea of how you compare under certain financial ratios. Okay? If you go to the page 2, it's the table of contents. I just want to make sure y'all understand what's in the book and how it's set up. There are a number of things in the appendix that I don't plan to go through, but they're there for support. Some of them are a little tough to read, pretty small font, but that's courtesy of the state of North Carolina for a couple of their analyses that the Local Government Commission in Raleigh maintains. And you'll see in Appendix C and D, there's 2 reports from the Local Government Commission, one on debt and one on cash and fund balances. We're going to reference those in our material, but I wanted the whole report to be in there if you wanted to see it. Appendix B, we've got an overview of our group, the work that we do. As Scott said, we have worked with Gates County for a number of years on a number of different projects. And then in Appendix A, the detail of all the debt you have on the books today, what we call existing debt. So what we really intend to cover is the pages 3 through 26, give or take. We're going to talk a little bit about credit ratings and introduce some comparisons that we're going to do. We're going to talk about fund balance. We're going to talk about your existing debt, the debt that's on the books today that y'all have committed to or prior boards have committed to. We're going to look at some comparisons to other peer groups that line up on your population range within North Carolina. And we're going to talk about capital planning, both in the general fund and the utility. Okay?
If I could interject real quickly for our audience at home that might be viewing on YouTube, this document is in digital form on the county's website. So if someone has dialed in and has their computer, they can go to the county search bar and type in Davenport, and they'll find this document in digital form.
Okay, great. So let's go to page 4. Credit rating overview and peer comparatives. The county does not currently have a bond rating or a credit rating. It's not because you're not credit worthy, you just have not needed one. And there are many counties in North Carolina and across the country that don't have credit ratings. But on the left-hand side, just quickly, there are 3 national rating agencies that rate local governments: Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. The highest credit rating that any local government can achieve is a AAA. And from there, going down, you have the AA category and the single A category, which is where most North Carolina local governments land if they have a rating. On the right-hand side are some groups that we're going to compare you to. The top right is counties nationally, just counties nationally. Those that are rated AAA, you'll see there's about 109 of those. In the AA range, almost 500. In the single A range, about 127. So Moody's rates in those 3 rating categories across the country about 735 counties. Within North Carolina, 12 AAA counties, 42 AA counties, and 4 single A counties. So Moody's rates 58 of the 100 counties in North Carolina. So the fact that you don't have a rating, there are many counties that don't carry ratings. And you can see in the very bottom right which counties land in each of those rating categories, okay? And we'll talk more about the rating agencies, not because we feel like the county needs to establish a rating, but because they have good data, they have the ability to do some good comparisons to see where we stand. And you may find at some point in the future that establishing a bond rating might be helpful or necessary, and the more you know about that process, the better.
And I just want to say, just like Scott said, that the board received their digital copy last Friday, so this is not the first time that we've had this.
Okay, great. On page 5, you'll see that there is the summary of the approach to rating local governments, and I'll talk off the top left for Moody's. They're very data-driven. They look at audits, they look at budgets, they look at census data. And Moody's in particular has a scorecard methodology that they use where they assign weightings to different credit factors. So the economy is 30% of their rating. That's tax base per capita, and certain wealth or income levels. The check boxes are our attempt to sort of talk about whether you as a governing body have short-term control over long-term control over that input. In economy, tax base, wealth levels, you don't have a lot of short-term control. You can't manage those things year in and year out. They're longer-term initiatives. That's why the long-term box is checked. Financial performance is 30%, talking about how you perform relative to budget, your year-end results, and your fund balance or reserve levels. And you do have both short and long-term control over that. Institutional framework is 10%. You get a very good score there by being a North Carolina county. The rating agencies view North Carolina as a good local government state. relative to other states, you all have a lot of control over parts of your budget that other places may not have the same level of control. So you get a good score there. And then finally, leverage. That includes actual debt. It includes pension obligations for your employees, post-employment benefit obligations for your retirees, things of that nature. So debt and debt-like items. And so S&P gets to about the same place. They got a few more moving parts. But I wanted to just make that clear. A lot of times when people talk about the rating agencies, they think immediately about debt. And debt is certainly part of their analysis, but there are a number of other things that go into their assessment of your credit worthiness. All right, so we'll talk off page 7. We'll talk a little bit about fund balance. Page 7 is just a restatement of 5 years of audited financials for the general fund. You'll be able to tie back to your audit. If you care to go back, you can see we have fiscal years 18 through 22. Down through line 9, we have total revenues, right? So by department or major category. Expenditures sum up to line 23, again, by major department or category. Line 25 is whether or not on an operational basis, revenues versus expenditures. And over every one of these 5 years, you all have had a positive surplus of operations. More revenue coming in than expenditures going out. Some years it was greater than others, but positive in each year. Down around line 27 through 32, we have other transfers that are going in and out for various purposes. And we get down to line 34, which is the change in fund balance in any given year. And 4 out of the 5 years you have added to fund balance. And you can see that at the very bottom, where your total fund balance in the general fund has moved from about 2.5 million to about 8.3 million. So you have had 5 years of very solid operations. You're running a surplus operationally. At the end of the year, even with capital and transfers, you're adding to fund balance, and you've grown that fund balance very nicely. Moving over to page 8, you'll be able to see on the left lines 5 through 12. This is the detail of the fund balance as reported in the audit, right, according to accounting practices. So there are there are a handful of different categories of fund balance, but you'll see that line 12, which is the total fund balance, matches the prior page, right? It's gone from 2.5 to 8.3 million. And importantly, on line 11, it's called unassigned fund balance. That is the component of fund balance over which you all have the most control, the least amount of outside restrictions, and that is sitting at about 4.4, almost 4.5 million at the end of the last audited fiscal year, FY22. Graphically on the right, you can see that your fund balance as a percent of your budget has been growing every year. Unassigned fund balance was relatively maybe flat to slightly down as a percent of budget in 21 to 22, but total fund balance has grown, and you are maintaining an unassigned fund balance as a percent of budget in the low to mid 30% range, which is very solid. Okay? And you can see over the course of these graphs, you had been down in the 10% range, unassigned fund balance as a percent of budget. So even though your budgets have been growing, so have your reserves, and in fact the reserves have been growing at a faster pace than the budget, so the percentages have been moving higher. Okay? So look at page 9. I would suggest, this is the first comparison that we've done, I would suggest we focus in the bottom right corner. It's one of the more important graphs here, and that is your unassigned fund balance, just that one component, right, 4.5 million as a percent of your budget based on revenues. And you can see in that chart, the gold bar is Gates County sitting at about 30%. You see that in the bottom right chart. Mm-hmm. The lighter green bars are the median measurements, so it's the midpoint for the national counties that are rated AAA, AA, single A. And then the darker green are the North Carolina counties, AAA, AA, single A. On this chart, you would like your bar further to the right, and you'll note you compare really well to any one of these groups, AAA down to single A. And for example, within North Carolina, look at the double A's, it's the second from the bottom. The median, which is the midpoint of that group, there are about 30 counties in that group, give or take. The midpoint of that looks to me to be about 28% or so. But you'll see that blue line, it's the min and the max. So there's somebody that's under 10% and somebody that's up around pushing 60%, right? So it's a pretty wide range for that AA category, the median being at about 28% and you all sitting above 30%. So we look at this, not only the trend over the last 5 years, but also where you stand as of FY22 compared to other very highly rated communities, and you compare well. Okay? All right, so now we're going to focus on debt. If you go to page 11, this is your tax-supported debt. So there's no utility debt running through this. This is county projects, school projects, no utility projects run through this. Tax-supported debt. On the left-hand side, in the bottom left, you'll see there's about $8.4 million of debt outstanding as of the last audit in FY22. So the principal outstanding is about $8.4 million. 6.5 of that was for school projects, and about $1.8 million of that was for non-school county projects. The bar chart at the top is shown on a fiscal year basis. The principal payments in dark green, the interest is in light green. So you'll see in the year we're in, right? Remember, we're about to wrap up FY23. Our debt payments, your debt payments are relatively flat for the next 3 years, a little over 1.1 million. You've got a big step down in your debt payments in 2026. It steps down almost $400,000. And so that's because an older piece of debt is maturing. And so that is creating a potential opportunity for you all, right? That payment, and you can see it on the right-hand side, maybe a little bit more clearly, the principal, the interest, and the total payment. When that steps down from $1,081,000 to $632,000, you're going to have about $400,000 that is freed up. And then, decision to make at that time of what do we do with those funds, right? Do we set them aside in a fund balance? Do we use some of those to fund something in the operating budget? Do we try to preserve them in the capital budget to give you a starting point for funding some other project, whatever it may be? So not something you necessarily have to deal with today, but it's a good opportunity that's coming, and it gives you options. The far right column here, it says 10-year payout ratio. It's measured in percentage. What that is measuring is, with this payment schedule, how much of this debt, the principal, will be repaid in the next 10 years. So it's forward-looking. And what this is telling us is that 10 years from now, 70% of this debt will have been paid back. So higher is better. It means you're paying your debt back more quickly. You're not backloading the debt. And you'll see here in a moment that is an important debt ratio that rating agencies, lenders, the local government commission might look at. And you'll see when you flip to page 12 and you look at the comparison on the right-hand side, the same basic groups, right? You've got Gates County in the gold bar. You've got the national counties in light green and the North Carolina counties in dark green. Higher is better here. So you look very good. You're really right on top of, maybe a tad below the median, but you're certainly not an outlier on the low end. Again, with higher being better. A typical policy or best practice would be to try to maintain a minimum of 50 to 60%, meaning you wouldn't want to fall below that. In this particular ratio, this percentage is better if it's higher, because it means the debt is maturing more quickly. Okay? All right, we go to page 13. It's another debt ratio that's important. It's called debt to assess value. So what we're measuring here is the principal that's outstanding in your debt, and remember that's about $8.4 million, on a tax base that's right at $1 billion, your total taxable assessed value in the county, right at $1 billion of tax base. So when we do the debt to assessed value, you'll see on the left, the math is 0.8%. So you're under 1% when we do that analysis. We've graphed that in the left. The green bars that are going down over time, they're going down because you're paying down debt every year. We're assuming about a 1% growth rate in your tax base. A typical policy range would be not to exceed, right? So it is an upper limit. We don't want to go above, let's say, 2 to 3%. You're at 0.8%. So when we look at this and we start talking about the county and do they have capital needs that they need to fund, would they possibly need to use debt to fund those projects? It's a very reasonable conversation. The county has debt capacity, right? We can look at these different ratios and look at the comparisons and say they are not overburdened with debt. They've used debt smartly. There is capacity. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's affordable, right? Where does the money come from to repay it every year is a related but different question. But on the capacity, and we're going to get to the affordability in a moment, the capacity is there. You can see on the right-hand side, you compare very well, particularly to the North Carolina counties there. Lower is better. You're lower than most of the medians. You can see there are some counties out there that are in excess of 2%. You're less than 1%. Just as an aside, those lighter green bars, which are the counties across the country, those look very low by comparison. That's because in a number of states, you have independent school districts that can issue debt and tax. And so in those states, the counties don't carry the debt of the schools. And so that's just a little bit of a difference when you get to the national comparisons, but the North Carolina ones obviously will be apples to apples, okay? And then the last debt ratio, in this case, I'm on page 14, what we're measuring is the annual payment. Remember, that's about $1.1 million a year right now. The annual payment as a percent of your budget, it's about 8%. You can see that graphed on the left-hand side. You'll see that big drop in 26, right? Because remember, that's when that payment drops to 600,000-ish. A typical policy range might be, again, this is an upper limit, 15 to 18% or even 20. We wouldn't want to go above that. You're at 8%. So like the prior page, when we look at this kind of in isolation, the county has capacity. It's a reasonable conversation to be talking about capital projects and debt. If you have things that you want to do, we're going to get to that second and maybe more important question, which is the affordability. How do we pay for it if indeed that's something we want to do? Comparison-wise, you look good on the right-hand side and you fall into what they call the strong category. Actually, you're almost in the very strong category. So those pages are really talking about the capacity. Page 15 is important to understanding the affordability of your debt. It mirrors or demonstrates the way that you're budgeting for your debt. And so if you start on the left-hand side of page 15, we have everything listed on a fiscal year basis, starting with the year we're in, FY23. Column B is the debt payments, debt service payments you're making for the county-related debt obligations. That's on the books today. We know it to the penny. It's only going to change if you change it. So column B is the county. Column C is the school-related debt service, right? D, E, and F are placeholders for what might come in the future. What are your capital needs? Developing a capital improvement plan, identifying projects by year, and this is where we would be able to layer in different scenarios of other projects that you might want to consider. So for now, it's just your existing debt, and as such, column G is simply B plus C. And that is the debt profile we looked at earlier. It's $1.1 million a year for 3 years, and then it steps down. Column H, we have a very simple debt budgeting process at this point. You have an annual appropriation from the general fund from current year revenues of about $1.1 million, which is exactly what your payment is in the current year. So you are perfectly matched, right? You owe 1.1 for this debt or multiple pieces of debt together, and you've got a current year appropriation of 1.1. And so when you look at column K, we're comparing the revenue versus the payment. It's balanced. It's 0 in 23. The key to this analysis is that under column H, if you consider continuing to budget at $1.1 million a year, even though your debt payments will be stepping down, right? So this is an approach that says we want to maintain a flat funding, at least a flat funding for capital and debt, and as our actual payments step down, we create these surpluses in column K. And they're, smaller dollars for a couple of years, but you get into some very, more significant dollars. And we're, for the time being, accumulating those on the far right-hand side of the page in a hypothetical capital reserve, right? Mm-hmm. But again, the decision will come to the board that's sitting at that point. What do we do with that 19 or 39 or $400,000 in that given year? Do we have pressures over here in some other part of our budget that we need to address, and this is an easy way or a convenient way to do it, or do we want to keep this in the capital? Okay? The other thing that's important to understand is there are certain dollars that you all collect, and I'm talking about this green box. There are certain dollars that you all collect in sales tax in particular that are restricted, and they're restricted for school capital or school debt service. So going forward, as we potentially talk about capital projects, one of the things that we need to do collectively is make sure that you're not inadvertently using those restricted dollars for a non-school project. And so that can be fine-tuned as we go, and we can identify the different pots of money that make up column H, but that's important to understand that these future surpluses certainly are available for school projects. They may be available for county projects if we can track them and make sure we're not spending restricted dollars for purposes they weren't intended. So you have the beginnings of some affordability for future capital. Again, if you decide that methodology of flat funding or maintaining that level funding makes sense for where you all are. Any questions on that before I go to the next section? Okay. This is a section pulling from the local government commission reports that are in the appendix, and this is getting more detailed about some North Carolina peers. So if you look at page 17, the local government commissioner, state treasurer's office tracks a number of data points, and they break the groupings into counties, and in this case, you fall into the 10,000 to call it 25,000 population range. And you can see there's, whatever it is, 15, 20 different counties that are in that range, right? All across the state. And on the right-hand side, we've shown you from high to low, everybody in this group in terms of population. And so from population, you all are the smallest of this group, right? So that's maybe interesting, but there's some additional slides here that might be more interesting or tell you a little more. So you're the smallest in terms of population. When you look at the left-hand side of 18D, debt outstanding, right? So remember, for you all, you were in that $8 million range. It's kind of interesting to see how that goes from highest to lowest, right? So you're kind of in the middle of this grouping in that case. Now, we also know that every county is in a different stage of addressing capital needs. So, we happen to work with Washington County as an example. They are moving forward with a very significant school project that will require debt. So a year from now, they're going to move from second to the bottom, further up towards the top. So it's always evolving as people are deciding to do things in different periods. But for now, you're right in the middle. On assessed value on the right, remember I said your assessed value is right at $1 billion. That's on the lowest end of this universe. There's Avery County, excess of a little over $4 billion, and you can kind of see the distribution across this peer group. Page 19, debt to assessed value. So here's where we're measuring the debt outstanding as a percent of your tax base, and from our prior graph, that was like 0.8% for you all, give or take. And so you can kind of see how that math works out for this peer group. So you're on the higher end, but you can see there are some folks in this grouping that are in excess of 2 to 3%. And Camden County, obviously, in the area, I think they are also one that's been investing pretty heavily in school projects. Debt per capita on the right, so the debt outstanding on a per person basis, you're sort of in the top third there, or the upper third, okay? Again, just perspective about, relevant peers that are a little bit closer to home than the Moody's comparisons we did. Page 20 on the left, available fund balance. That is a North Carolina specific calculation. Remember, in the beginning of this book, I was talking about unassigned fund balance, and that was about $4.5 million. This is a slightly different calculation, available fund balance. So sort of in that bottom third, even though your reserves have been growing significantly. That's dollars on the left. As a percent of budget, you compare more favorably, right? Because we're bigger places with bigger budgets are likely to have more dollars in reserves. But when we really want a cleaner comparison, we do it as a percent of budget, which is on the right-hand side. And so you're very close to the middle there. All right? So we thought that section would be helpful. Like I said, it's a little bit, it's a little more meaningful perhaps because it is communities that you're familiar with. All right, so now we've got a few slides on capital improvement planning and financing considerations. This information is not unique to Gates County, so this is sort of higher level. And on page 22, we just sort of show you a life cycle, I guess, maybe, or different phases of a capital improvement plan, identifying the universe of capital projects. I'm not going to read all of those to you. Analyzing the capital funding capacity and affordability. We've kind of started that tonight. Stage 2 is you start to review the requested capital projects, let's say from department heads. Maybe this is all being done at the staff level and it's being presented to you all in summary form. You begin to have an opportunity to prioritize projects. Stage 3, you're sort of evolving and you're really putting a plan together and beginning to say, this is how we're going to fund it, year 1, 2, 3. Oftentimes people look at a 3 to 5 year CIP, sometimes longer. And then finally in phase 4, it's being finalized, maybe it's being adopted as part of your budget process. At the same time that you're adopting your CIP, you would typically fund year 1 of the CIP. So you might adopt a 5-year program, but you choose to fund year 1 as part of your budget process. So I know every county is in sort of different stages of refinement of their capital plan, and I think that's something that Scott and I talked about, and maybe one of the directives he's been given, or at least something he would like to address, is sort of perhaps putting a little more structure to that process and looking further out And some of what we presented to you tonight can be helpful, so that if this is what you want to do, what is it going to take year 2 or 3 to fund it, and you can start taking that into consideration in your current decisions for the current year. That's a CIP. Within North Carolina, on page 23, we essentially have 4 types of debt that we can issue. General obligation bonds, that has to be voted. A county referendum would have to be held. We talk a little bit about the security and the considerations. It's the best credit or security that any local government could give, because it's backed by your full faith and credit, your taxing authority. Legally obligated, if you can't make the payment, to raise taxes to generate the dollars to make the payment. But that's a referendum process. Installment financing, limited obligation bonds, or certificates of participation, very commonly used, does not require a referendum. You have to have a public hearing. The board has to take certain actions. And those loans are usually secured by an asset, a mortgage on a building, a deed of trust on a facility, what have you. But they're very commonly used. You all have used them before. Revenue bonds, typically associated with utilities. So it would be, for example, a pledge of your water system revenues or your sewer system revenues that is not secured by a mortgage. There's not a lien on your plant or your pipes or your pump station. It's a pledge of the revenues. And then finally, special obligation bonds, which is probably the least commonly used, but one that can be very effective. And that gives local governments the ability to borrow money, and the security is a pledge of non-tax revenue, right? So for you all as a county, you can't do a special obligation bond and pledge your real property tax, because that requires a referendum. It's your tax. Sales tax, you levy sales tax, or at least certain pieces of sales tax, you can't pledge those. But there are other non-tax revenues that you might receive that you could use as security for a special obligation bond. As I said, it's less commonly used, but in certain situations it can be helpful or effective. Finally, nearly final, page 24 is the way that you might go about issuing the debt if you decide that that's something you'd like to do. Very common, and you all have done this, we've assisted with it before, you've done it on your own. Direct bank loans, you go out and solicit proposals from banks. Very effective, a lot of good lenders that participate in North Carolina governmental finance. So that's certainly a widely used option. A public bond sale, this is where a rating is usually required, and you go into the bond market. It's done all the time, every week, literally, but usually you're getting to larger loans and loans that have, a longer payback period. And that's usually when the public market makes sense. Or thirdly here, some other program, a state program, a federal program, USDA, revolving loans, things of that nature are certainly effective depending on the project. So again, this section is just a little more about process and options. We've got a slide on the Local Government Commission on page 25. I won't go through that. I think you're familiar with that group. And then we were going to wrap up quickly on a couple of slides on utility. You do have a utility system. Page 27 talks a little bit about how the rating agencies go about rating utilities, slightly different than the way they rate local governments. They get into things like system characteristics. How big is it? What's your service area? Do you have competition? Right? That's the kind of thing. They look at it more like a business than they do on the governmental side. So system characteristics gets to those sorts of things. Your service area, as I said, your service area growth, the diversification of your clients or your customers. Financial strength, that's really about cash flow and reserves. Management, you get into policies, procedures. Are you you have good planning processes? Are you in compliance with regulatory requirements, environmental requirements, DEQ, things of that nature when it comes to utilities? And then finally, your legal provisions in your debt documents. So it gives you an idea of, it's just a different universe of credit factors that they look at compared to what we looked at the beginning of the book for the local government ratings. Page 28, very high level snapshot for you all for fiscal years 20, 21, and 22 for your water fund operating results. So I'd suggest we look at FY22, for example, and this is very what I call cash flow oriented, right? So we start at the top with the revenues of the system. They were a little over $1 million that year. Your expenditures, salaries, chemicals, just operating expenses, electricity, utilities were $846,000. Your line 3 there, net revenue available for debt service, is just simple math, revenues over expenditures. You had $155,000 left over after making your operating expenses. The prior year, you had $326,000. Year before that, $400,000. So revenues have been coming down a little bit, and expenses have been kind of flat, right? And I know enough, maybe there's some metering projects that are being discussed, I think, Scott, right? And those sorts of things that may be contributing to the revenue trend that we're seeing. So there may be an ability to sort of reverse that. But that net revenue available for debt service is getting a little bit tighter. You have no debt service currently, right? So there is no debt service to pay. And so that surplus, if you will, is able to be used on capital or to grow your reserves. And you can see there on line 16, your ending unrestricted cash has gotten a little stronger over the years. You're, over $2.5 million. And on a percent of budget basis, that's, almost 300% of your operating expenditure budget. So it's not a huge dollar amount, $2 million, $2.6 million, but as a percent of your operating budget, it's pretty substantial, 300% or so. So on a going forward basis, I know, these are things you all are looking at, different projects that might require debt or pay-as-you-go cash funding. There is an ability to sort of expand upon this analysis if there's things we want to look at, just like on the general fund side, things that you might want to get done. Same thing on the utility side. What are things we want to do, and do we have the ability to pay for them with cash or debt, and what does that look like? That's what this is intended to be sort of starting to discuss. You'll see the very bottom there, potential next steps. It could be updated for FY23 results when those are available. Refining and including the capital plan, whatever that is. What are the projects that might be needed or desired for utilities? And then you get into what we call a pro forma, or the projections. What does the projected financial performance of the system look like? Revenues, expenses, capital, and debt, looking out over a 3 to 5 year period. We've done the same on the landfill on page 29. I think that is your share. I guess we call it the landfill fund, and I believe that's still what it's called in the county books, but it is your share in a regional solid waste operation. So kind of the same setup here: revenues, expenditures, revenues available for debt service. You have no debt service, so it sort of very closely models that prior page for water. And the same takeaways. Are there capital needs that you might have in this fund that you want to understand the affordability of those? So in closing on page 30, what could be some potential next steps? development and refining of some financial policies, if that's something you might want to do. Remember, we talked about some of those on the front end. My recommendation would be, if that is something you want to do, that it be done in conjunction with a capital plan, so that you consider establishing a policy that is in sync with the capital plan you have, and you don't inadvertently set a policy that all of a sudden precludes you from doing things you want to do. They can be done together, and it tends to make a lot of sense to do it that way. Expand and dig into the general fund and utility fund more than we have here today. The capital planning side of thing in particular, begin to model up a capital improvement plan, once this budget is done, or perhaps in anticipation of the next budget, whenever the timing might be right, for both the general fund and the utility fund. And any other, financial related, planning or capital related initiatives that might be a priority for you all. So I hope it's helpful. I know it's a lot of information, but hopefully reasonably understandable, gives you some good perspective, at least on the capital side of your budget, as you all are working to get that done by the end of the fiscal year. Any questions?
Any questions from the commissioners? Any comments from the commissioners?
Yes, I have a comment. This is a valuable tool, and I really appreciate Davenport giving us this data and this information so we can implement it. This is great.
Thank you.
I just hope the numbers for 2023 look as good as some of the numbers prior. I've got a feeling they're not when we plug those numbers in.
Yeah.
Especially on the water side. I don't think we'll be in a positive position.
Understand. Yeah, and I don't know a whole lot about it, but I understand that's a top priority for you all, is to...
Year to date, we are running revenues ahead of expenditures, so
Good.
assuming we don't have a catastrophe between now and June 30, but we're keeping our head above water.
Let's hope we still do.
For the entire staff, so I mean, we're doing well there. I think we'll be okay.
I think the report undergirds and gives us the foundation we already knew as a board, that we need to have a planned budget, that we need to have capital improvement plans. And that leads to priorities. Every year it seems like whatever breaks, that's what we fix or don't fix. So this analysis and all these figures, and I took a lot of notes before the meeting, and I just looked at it again. But it gives us a forward thinking as far as how we need to operate as a budget. That's the infrastructure that we got to get right. If the budget is not solvent, then we can't do anything. We just frustrate ourselves, and inflation this year has really hit us hard. It's hitting us hard, but we're above water, according to what I've been seeing and hearing from the financial team. So I appreciate, on behalf of the board, what's going on here. I think we should applaud the finance department for keeping their eyes on the ball, so to speak, making sure that we're paying what we pay, we're not overspending and not messing with restricted funds and things of that nature. Sometimes it's hard to understand why they say no, but when you see the analysis, that's why they say no.
Right.
If a small county, it's easy to get lost. We don't have so much funding, and that's the reason we go after grants. There's no match. You like no match. So we can do some of those capital improvements and other things that's non-recurring costs. So that's why we are very aggressive in seeking grant funding that the state what they call it, funding for a generation. It's money everywhere. And so we're going to continue to be aggressive in seeking those grants to help us with our capital repair. And I think Mr. Robinson, we'll talk about him in a minute, but I think his experience in some of this is going to help us as far as we're getting ready to spend federal dollars to ARPA funding. And we got to be mindful of that when we spend it, and track it and monitor it.
That's right.
And so I think we're in a good position. as a county, I think. I don't know what the other commissioners, but I think financially, I think we're right where we need to be, and now we have the evidence, research-based, from Mr. Ted Cole, so we can use this going forward. I did write down all the policies that you recommended in the report, Mr. Sauer, and I think that's something we need to, as your team, you build your team to look at those policies so that we have policies around our fund balance and where we want it to be, and things not to exceed and restrictions and all of that. We need to have policies in place. So the next board, because every year the board changes.
Right.
And if you have it in policy, you tweak that policy instead of trying to figure out what they did or what we should do. So that's one of the comments I want to make to the financial team, to start looking at these policies that have been recommended by Davenport and get them in place, along with the capital improvement plan, as he said, align them up so that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot. I just want to get that in the minutes. So that's an expectation from the board. Like I said, the board had this ever since Friday. So this is not the first time they've seen it. And I know they went through it. Some of them said, what in the world is this? I said, he'll come and tell us. So, and I know you have extra copies, hard copies.
We do. There's a handful of hard copies here, and we're happy to.
Well, I see the attendees, and they've been very patient. So if we have enough to give them a hard copy to take home as a parting gift. I know it's on the website, but, just...
Keep one for credit.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
If they want it, or like,
Raise your hand if you want a hard copy of this report. If you don't, that's fine. You can look at it. You can look.
You said it's over the county jail.
It's on the website.
We have access to that, and I do appreciate the hard job.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments from Mr. Davenport so we get him on the road?
So, Madam Chair, I just want to say that I'm very encouraged our position in relationship to the 58 counties that are in the report and the national counties. We are in a great position.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks, Ted.
have a safe
Appreciate
trip.
it.
Appreciate it.
Drive safely. Let's see. Next on the agenda is the employment agreement proposal for Mr. William Robertson, Gates County Finance Director, and the county manager will be discussing with the commissioners.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the board will recall, at the end of last meeting, there was an indication that the governing body desired to have a contract to secure the long-term services of Mr. Robertson. And I think it's important to, as you take this step, to reiterate for your public record and the audience that when the county started advertising to replace the finance director who moved on to the regional health system, Ms. Kim Outland, we were advertising statewide through the Association of County Commissioners, through the League of Municipalities. And at the time I started here with Gates County, we had received 0 applications for the position of finance officer. This is a highly skilled and responsible position that is daunting and sometimes intimidating for applicants to take on because of the complexity of the finances of any local government, as we've just heard in this report on the county's debt service. The agreement before you this evening is to secure the employment of Mr. William Robertson for a 5-year term with 2-year renewals, which would roll forward automatically if there's no objection from either the governing body or Mr. Robertson. The salary for this position is $105,000. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about his experience and what makes his candidacy so attractive for us here in Gates County. Mr. Robertson just left a position in Bertie County, where he'd been the finance officer for over 11 years. Prior to that, he had served as the information technology director for about 18 years. He comes to us with a two-prong, or I should say a two-edged sword of skills, being both the financial side and the information technology side. He also served, we talk about regionalization all the time. 25 years ago, a couple of counties, Hertford County and Bertie County, started a regional data center. And it was done through the Soundside Group. I know they do consulting in this region and for our county of Department of Social Services. He initially entered the arena of information technology and local government, working at the Bertie Hertford Data Center. And after a few years, Bertie County hired him to come in and be their systems administrator. So his service in local government is extensive. We heard recently about, with Mr. Cole, school projects, utility projects. Mr. Robertson comes with experience not only with the planning and the borrowing to finance some of these long-term projects, but also the refinancing of projects, which is an extremely intricate exercise. He was also part of the leadership team that helped with the recovery of Hurricane Matthew and Tropical Storm Julia, when the jurisdiction he was serving lost 3 facilities at once: a public library, a cooperative extension facility, and their largest EMS station, which had 3 full-time ambulances and crews that worked 24 hours a day. All of them were flooded out in September of 2016. Through his efforts with FEMA, with Golden Leaf, and through the State Department of Commerce, in that situation, they were able to generate over $4 million from Golden Leaf grant money to do the reconstruction of the library and cooperative extension, over $500,000 in grant money from Commerce to rebuild the EMS station. And I can't say enough about his tenacity when it came to dealing with FEMA and the regulatory headaches that come with that devastation. It's bad enough when your community is destroyed by a flood or a hurricane, but when the feds come in, it's another monster of a storm. Mr. Robertson also comes to us with 18 years of statistical analysis work in the textile industry. And but for NAFTA and the closing of many textile plants nationwide and in North Carolina, he may not have ever made that transition into local government. But I believe we have the opportunity to secure his services for many years to protect what we've just heard about in this report from Dan, to protect the treasury of Gates County. And the full contract is in your package, and I would ask that the board entertain a motion to approve this. He accepted this position to be a department head to direct the finance department of Gates County, but it was your further discussion that said, well, let's try to lock him in for a little while longer than most folks might think about. But I think you'll find when he commits to a task or to an organization, he'll be a bulldog for us. So.
You've heard the report and the update from the county manager. You have any questions? And I ask for a motion to approve the employment agreement proposal for William Robinson, Gates County Finance Director.
So move.
Second.
It's been properly moved and second. All in favor? Aye. Ayes have it. Welcome, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you.
The third item on our agenda is request for qualifications for professional engineering services. The county manager will be discussing with the commissioners.
Item next is for information only. There's no action required this evening. This step that we're taking is the required subsequent process Now that you've adopted a capital improvement plan for your water and sewer utilities, the board has just authorized applications for water and sewer improvements through the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. And when one of those projects is funded, and I want to say when, not if, when those projects start to be funded, there is another competitive process where we have to make the official engineer designation that has to be competitive. We go through what they call a request for qualifications. And you might ask, well, why was the gentleman from Green Engineering here the last couple times? Professional engineering companies operate on an at-risk basis as required in North Carolina. So the time that they have invested meeting with this board, learning about our system is an effort they put in to make themselves competitive in future processes. So we have not, Gates County has not paid any funding to the Green Engineering Consulting heretofore. Just like, and I should explain for Mr. Cole, Davenport is here because of decisions made by former boards maybe 12, 14 years ago when the school capital planning, the planning for the Department of Social Services facility was done. There was an engagement with them as a financial planner and a fiduciary. Their payment comes once the local government commission approves a debt obligation that has been documented and approved by the governing body. And they are paid at the closing of that loan. And those loans took place many years ago. You can look back on these documents and see they may have been paid 5, 10, 6, however many years. Their ongoing obligation is to provide at no additional cost updates and forecast and reporting to this governing body. You may not borrow another dime for schools or what have you, and may never use Davenport again, but they are obligated, as long as we have that debt, to come back and make those reports. So you've been getting a lot of, I think, good advice from the folks you've had here the last couple of nights. So we are going through the request for qualifications. The proposals from those interested firms will be due May 24th, and we will be bringing recommendations sometime in June to help secure a permanent relationship with a firm as we look to implement these projects. Again, this is just for information.
Okay.
Can I jump to the next one?
The next one is the Gates County Soil and Water Conservation District, and will give us information, no action required.
Well, and this started out as kind of a kickoff to our budget planning as I met with the leadership and agency managers from across the county departments. In talking with Matt Lowe, he shared with me that there had been some discussions between the Hertford County Soil and Water Conservation District and our Gates County Soil and Water Conservation District about some possible technical collaboration and cost sharing, much like we do with the Cooperative Extension and any number of their programs where we have agents that cover multiple counties. In this particular discussion, as I understand it, there is a partnership under consideration with just Gates County and Hertford County. Mr. Lowe is here, and he has with him, and I threw my piece here, Mr. Robert Miller III is an elected member of the Soil and Water Conservation District, and he's been gracious enough to join us. It's my understanding that Hertford County in recent weeks has approved their participation in a partnership with Gates County and the Soil and Water Conservation District. But I think, as I heard in a meeting earlier today with Commissioner Hoffler on another topic, the devil's in the details. We need to now, if all parties are in agreement, hammer out a memorandum of understanding to protect Gates County citizens, Gates County farmers, and our own soil and water district. But this is a really good opportunity for Mr. Lowe. It's a great opportunity for Gates County to demonstrate its professionalism and expertise in this area. And it's on the horizon. So again, I had mentioned to Matt, he doesn't have to say anything, but he told me just this morning that Hertford has already pulled the trigger and said they want to go down the aisle with you. So I don't know if...
Mr. Lowe, would you like to come up to the podium? Good evening.
I don't have anything to say. I was just here to answer any questions or concerns y'all may have. Try to.
It's my understanding, I talked to Mr. Morgan, he could call me tonight before I came, that it will be a cost savings to Hertford County as well as to us,
Yes, ma'am.
and also it would help you.
Yes, ma'am.
So it looks like to me a win-win situation.
And there is a data sheet in front of your desk that was brought out, just to give you some comparisons. Geographically, we're comparable in size. Gates County is 340 acres. Hertford County is 340 square miles. Hertford is 353 square miles. Farmland acreage, almost 58,000 in Gates County, almost 81,000 acres in Hertford County. Harvested cropland, 43,874 in Gates, 53,364. So there's a little bit larger territory to cover over there in Hertford County. So we want to make doubly sure that he doesn't get stretched too thin, that he's not looking after the Gates County folks who have invested heavily in his career and help bring our agency to the level that it is. But this is, I think, a great opportunity to help our neighbor and to work regionally and to hopefully keep Matt here a long time.
There's no action required, but you mentioned a memorandum of understanding. So do you have a due date, or should we start working?
Well, I guess
on
we'll have to have that done by budget time, by June 30.
They would have liked to see something. They don't have a technician, hadn't had a technician since August, so they're pushing. They wanted something like next week, which is pretty quick turnaround.
Okay. Well, County Manager, you and
I guess we've got
attorney?
our work cut out for us.
Okay. We're going to work on that, and
Do we need a motion to tell them about start working on it? MOU?
I think you could, yeah, I think if the board were to pass a motion directing staff to move post haste on a memorandum of understanding, that'd be good for the record for,
I need a motion
I'll
to...
so move.
Wait a minute. We need a motion to instruct the staff under the leadership of Mr. Sauer to work on a draft for the MOU with the attorney as soon as possible.
Okay, I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, Mr. Lowe? Thank you.
Don't we need to vote?
Let's vote on it. All in favor? No opposed? Okay. Next on the agenda is board appointments, reappointment, clerk to the board. The clerk will be approaching the podium to discuss each board. Okay, that's in your packet. I think we have another one that's at your desk when you arrived today.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening.
First, we're going to start with the Gates County Planning Board, and you do have an addition in front of you, who is Christopher Odom. For the reappointment, we will have Brian Silver. He will serve a 3-year term. Perry Taylor, he will serve a 3-year term, but he will be an appointee. And Christopher Odom as well. And that way she will not have any vacancies. When she started starting June, she'll have a full board. So if you all are happy with the applicants and appointees before you, if I can get a motion to approve the reappointment of Brian Silver and appointment of Perry C. Tyler and Christopher Odom to be appointed to serve a 3-year term on the Gates County Planning Board effective May the 3rd.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and second that we accept the board action for appointment and reappointment of Brian Silver and appointment of Percy C. Tyler and Christopher Odom to be appointed to serve a 3-year term on the Gates County Planning Board effective May 3rd. All in favor? Aye. Okay.
Before we go on, I noticed in some of these applications that we had one person that was sending applications for 2 different boards.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have any regulations about the number of boards a citizen can be on? Serving on at the same time?
Now that I have not looked into, I will look into that.
I just, you like to have a wide range of people. I just didn't know we had, if that was, it seems like I remember something about that at one point.
The clerk will take a look at that and see if we have anything in the policy on that as far as serving on more than one board at the same time. And bring that back. I don't think we have anybody in this packet. I was
Yes,
looking.
we do.
We have
We
one?
do, we do.
Which one is it? It was
It's,
the planning board? I didn't see.
It's,
Board of Adjustment and the ABC Board of Gary Arline.
I was talking about the planning board. We just did the
No,
planning
it's
board.
not on the
Because
planning
if it's
board.
planning board, we got to stop.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Hold on, man. So he says what now? The gates?
It will be under the ABC Board and the Board of Adjustments.
also with the planning board and the board of adjustments, I do know that it is in the policy that they be as scattered, the members should be appointed from the various districts if all possible, so that each part of the county is represented. Like Hopsville, Corpy, Gates, Ewer, Gatesville, so that it's not all clustered in one place, because the county is very different in different areas.
I presented the applications to Ms. Lisa Cherry before they made it to this.
Okay. Well, I didn't, as I looked at them, they seem to be pretty well dispersed, but I do know that that is a consideration.
So Ms. Lisa Cherry, the Director of Planning and
Yes.
Zoning, okay,
Yes, she looked over all the applications
okay.
that's presented.
So the ones that we have questions about is the ABC Board and the Board of Adjustment. That's what I'm hearing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And when do these have to be?
We can,
I'm gonna tell you where I'm going with this, to table this until our next meeting on May 17th,
yes,
to make
we
sure.
We can table the Board of Adjustment and the ABC Board into the next meeting,
Okay.
so I can find out about, if memory can serve.
So we're gonna table the appointment.
And I don't mean to be causing trouble, but
I
You're
understand.
not calling trouble. We're just,
I want it to be
Make sure
right.
it's done correct.
okay. So we're gonna table the appointments for the ABC Board and the Board of Adjustment until our next meeting, which is May 17th.
Yes, ma'am.
Is all the commissioners in agreement with that? Okay.
Yes.
So what's next?
Next is the Gates Emergency and Medical Service Board.
Okay.
And I spoke with Mr. Stoner Butt, and he actually stated that Doug Lilly was interested in reappointment. He spoke with Cecil Bagley, who submitted the application, and he will have a full board. Doug Lilly, reappointment will be 3-year term. Expiration in September 2026. Cecil Bagley will serve a 3-year term. Expiration date will be September 2026.
We need a motion to approve and disapprove.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Properly moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, the Board of Adjustments will be tabled. And the ABC Board. So, what I will present to the board at our next meeting will be, I don't think it'd be wise for me to read over the vacancies because, it may not be correct.
Okay.
But I have one more, and that is the Gates County Library Board.
Okay.
We have one reappointment, and that is Miss Melissa Lawrence to serve a 6-year term, and there is one vacant seat.
I see that's going to be advertised for the Gates District.
Yes.
Gates County. But we can go ahead and reappoint.
Yes.
Okay, I make a motion, we reappoint Melissa Lawrence to the library board.
Second.
Properly moved in second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Mrs. Chestnut, we have in here about the housing authority. Does any action need to be taken for that?
No.
Just FYI?
And I thank you all, and I will bring that report back at our next meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Chestnut. Now we have county manager updates.
Thank you. One quick note from this morning, I had the pleasure of attending the opening of the Gates County Environmental Education Day, sponsored by our Soil and Water Conservation District and also our Cooperative Extension Office. In conjunction with the public schools, they had all 6th graders, I think they said the number was about 110 of them. It was a very interactive and educational effort, and we owe a great debt of thanks to all of those agencies that participated and made that happen. Item next is a follow-up again from last meeting. We had heard the reports from the broadband task force from both Mr. Erna Bright and Paul Smith from the Cooperative Extension Office about the risk to the farming operations from the low-hanging wires that are being installed by various contractors across the county, and there was consensus at that time at your last meeting that we prepare correspondence to go to the Commissioner of Agriculture, Mr. Steve Troxler. There is a letter at the desk prepared for your review and approval, and as such, if it is possible to get signatures individually from each commissioner, I think that will carry a lot more weight as it makes its way through the channels in Raleigh. It's interesting to note that the Roanoke Chowan Herald News and Cal Bryant picked up on your discussion at the last meeting. And in today's paper, part of their headline news is a very in-depth and extensive discussion of everything that the board covered at the last meeting. And Mr. Bryant did a really nice job on that for us.
I attended the Farm Bill listening session in Winton at the Extension Office this morning. Don Davis hosted that. He was in attendance, as well as ag agents, Marshall Cherry from Roanoke Connect. The North Carolina Rural Center had a their newest employee, Mr. Michael Kelly, was there. And I was on to speak about the pole height, and it was well received. Many of the counties did not know of the issue. They were very glad that Gates County is taking the lead in this. I did mention that we had reached out to our representatives, Mr. Bill Ward and Senator Hannock, as well as our lobbyists. The Farm Bureau Regional Director was there, and the previous Farm Bureau person, I can't remember his name, forgive me, but he said he used to live in Gates County, and he was like the field director or regional director in the past. So it was a good meeting. They took plenty of notes, and I'm very hopeful that they will address it. It's going to take time to change that code, the North Carolina code, electrical code, but they're on it. And so I encourage the commissioners to sign off on this letter that Mr. Sauer has prepared to be submitted as soon as possible. Mr. Craddock will be back in town tonight, and he can stop by in the morning to sign as well. We want individual signatures on this and send it on behalf of Gates County. Okay.
Item next, at the last meeting, the board heard from representatives of the Summit Design Group who have been leading the effort to gain some public input and citizens' opinions of the direction the project should take. As of this morning, there have been nearly 400 responses. The large majority has been the online or using the QR code, 365 online responses, 33 paper responses. This weekend, as we know, is the Gates County Rodeo, and, 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from now is the Gates County Rodeo, the 12th and 13th. And on Saturday, May 13th, we will have a tent set up and some folks passing out surveys, interviewing visitors, and hopefully gaining some additional public participation on that. At the community center project, where the board has grant funding to assess the building for the water damage that's been incurred over many years, that work started this week. So the team is on the ground. Roanoke Electric is going to be with the board in June, making a presentation. They have offered the services of their staff to take on a service project, a one-day event, and they need a proposed project. It could be a county facility, it could be a school need, it might be cleaning up around a local park or possibly something for one of the towns, but they would like to come and give back to the community, bring a team of maybe 8 or 9 staff, possibly more, and they could paint a building, they could plant flowers, they could do just about anything you might imagine in the way of benefit to the Gates County community. So please be thinking about that between now and June when they come, because they'll be
And what
asked.
group is it? I missed
This
it.
is Roanoke Roanoke Cooperative Electric, and I know they've changed their name now. Is it Roanoke Connect?
No,
Is that
it's not.
correct? Or
Oh,
okay. Well, they will be here in June, and they'll be very disappointed if we don't have a
I think we can think of something.
A project.
You can think of something.
As we've mentioned, we are heavily into the budget development. One of the conversations that I have been having is with Dr. Barry Williams, our school superintendent. They've got any number of struggles in planning and developing their budget for next fiscal year, and they have some strong expectation that there's going to be a change to the formula for the low wealth and small school appropriations from the General Assembly that could very well remedy some of the challenges that they have. If the board will recall, when we had the meeting think it was May 6th, possibly, when Dr. Williams came and made his presentation. The current expense figure that was presented was an increase of a little over $800,000. Dr. Williams and I have been talking about the possibility, if the two boards wanted to meet jointly, have a conversation, and talk about some fiscal strategy, whereby the board might entertain a one-time special appropriation, non-occurring funds that could be made available with the understanding that if the state budget works out as anticipated, as has been communicated by several members of the General Assembly, those funds may not be necessary. But the schools are asking, or Dr. Williams is suggesting, and I'm communicating, that we have that conversation and we talk about that, because there has been a lot of dialogue and discussion about how they want to proceed. So if that's an item that the governing body would like to entertain, please let me know. We'll put that together. And I'm not asking for action tonight, but there has been that ongoing dialogue with Dr. Williams and myself. And if there's any interest in pursuing a strategy like that, we'll certainly dial that into our work plan.
And I hear you say there's no action, but when do you want us to get back with you as far as, do we want to meet jointly with them?
I'm hoping with this discussion in a public venue, that if there's, based on what county commissioners have heard in their circles of communication and what we may have read in media reports and have spoken informally with members of the Board of Education, if there's a need to do that, time is of the essence, and it should happen right away. It could even coincide with your meeting on May 17th, possibly start earlier in the afternoon, whatever the board would want to entertain. But
I do know they have a board meeting this coming Monday. The school board has a meeting this coming Monday. Is there any, let me ask this of the commissioners that are here. Do you want to meet jointly with the Board of Education to discuss this? That's the simplest way I can put it.
Well, it doesn't hurt to discuss it, but no promises.
We didn't say promises. Is there any appetite to meet with the Board of Education jointly to discuss the situation with not only their budget, but get an update on ours as well?
I think it would be the most efficient way, rather than the back and forth between meetings. It would be the most efficient to go ahead and meet together.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Yes?
Yes.
So if you can work that out. What's the sound with Dr. Williams, the superintendent? Like I said, I do know they have a meeting on Monday. We have a next meeting on May 17th. That meeting, May 17th, we have to look at that agenda. We may have to do another special meeting. I don't know. We don't want to be here to midnight.
No.
We don't want to do that. So let's look at a date that he can get his board in attendance, and we'll meet, and that will be a special meeting just for that.
I'll communicate
We
that
can
to
do, we can
Dr.
do that,
Williams.
just for that.
And maybe the state budget will be a little clearer.
Mm-hmm.
We're hopeful.
Okay. Anything else?
That's all I have.
The only thing I have is in the paper today is the community garden. It's a big article that they have a community garden started at the community center. So if you can help them out, please do. Read the paper or call Shayla Hayes. She's the Gates Partnership for Health Coordinator in the county. And I was out there Saturday looking at it, and they need some community. It's a community garden. She's not going to do the garden by herself. So please, if you have a green thumb or can just do something, help them with that garden. They used to have that garden full-fledged years ago. They're trying to revive it. So please help. It's in the newspaper. There's a lot of articles of Gates County in the newspaper this week. So that's all I have. Does the commission have anything else to say before I ask for an adjournment? Okay.
comment.
All right. I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Do you want us to sign this paper?
She's,
But there's-
she's